If you've ever watched a millennial and a Gen Z person have the same exact conversation and somehow come away from it feeling completely different things, you've already noticed something real. It's not just slang. It's not just TikTok versus Facebook. It's something deeper, something that lives in how each generation was shaped, what they were taught to fear, what they were taught to hide, and what they quietly believe about themselves without even knowing it. Because when you look closely, the differences between millennials and Gen Z aren't really about age. They're about two completely different psychological blueprints. And once you see that, everything starts to make a lot more sense. Millennials grew up being told that if you work hard enough, things will work out, that the path was real. Get the degree, get the job, build the life. So many of them did everything right, and then watched the floor fall out anyway. What that does to a person psychologically is something very specific. It creates a generation that performs optimism, that pushes through, that doesn't want to be seen as someone who gives up. Millennials learn to smile through the anxiety, to say, "I'm fine," with a level of conviction that almost convinces themselves. That's not weakness. That's a very sophisticated form of emotional management. When you're raised to believe the system works and then the system fails you, you find a way to keep going anyway. Because admitting the truth feels like giving up on everything you built yourself around. Gen Z saw that from the beginning. Gen Z didn't grow up believing in the path the same way. They were raised online, watching everything unfold in real time. Financial crises, climate anxiety, political chaos. By the time they were teenagers, they'd already processed more collective disillusionment than most generations see in a lifetime. So they did something different. Instead of performing optimism, they leaned into honesty, sometimes radical honesty. The "I'm not okay" generation didn't say that to be dramatic. They said it because no one around them was saying it, and someone had to. Where a millennial might quietly spiral and then post something vague about going through it, a Gen Z person is more likely to just say the thing directly, without the performance layer. And that difference right there, that's not just a personality quirk. That's two different coping architectures built from two different emotional environments. But here's where it gets interesting, because on the surface, Gen Z's directness looks like confidence, and millennials' emotional management looks like avoidance. But that's not really what's happening. What's actually happening is this. Both generations are protecting themselves from the same thing: disappointment, loss of control, the gap between who they were told they'd become and who they're actually allowed to be. Millennials protect themselves by maintaining, keeping the performance going. If they stay positive, if they keep pushing, maybe the story still turns out the way it was supposed to. There's a deep fear underneath, not of failure, but of admitting how long they've been tired. Gen Z protects themselves by preempting, by naming the disappointment before it names them, by opting out of systems that seem rigged, by rejecting the performance altogether. There's a different fear underneath, not of failure, but of being trapped inside a narrative they didn't choose. Two different fears, two different defenses, same wound. You can see it in the smallest things. The way millennials will stay in a job they hate for years, because leaving feels like abandoning their past self, the one who worked so hard to get there. The way they'll apologize in emails 3 times before the actual sentence. The way they call anxiety stress because stress sounds more manageable. And the way Gen Z will leave a job in 2 weeks if it feels wrong and explain it without apology. The way they'll set a boundary in a text message like it's the most normal thing in the world. The way they'll say "I have anxiety" the same way someone says "I have allergies." Neither of these is more evolved. They're just different responses to different emotional conditioning. Millennials were conditioned toward endurance. Gen Z was conditioned toward transparency. And the thing is, each one finds the other slightly uncomfortable to watch. Millennials sometimes experience Gen Z's honesty as recklessness. Gen Z sometimes experiences millennial resilience as denial. But really, they're just looking at a version of coping that never occurred to them as an option. What makes this psychologically significant is what it does to identity. Millennials built their identity around becoming, around a future self that was always just one more step ahead. A lot of that identity is tied to the story of the struggle, the hustle, the sacrifice, the "we made it work," which is why criticism of that path can feel so personal. It's not just a life choice, It's the architecture of who they decided they were. Gen Z built identity differently, more fluid, more plural, less attached to a single narrative of self, which is why they can shift aesthetics, careers, and even deeply held beliefs without it feeling like a crisis. Identity, for many of them, isn't something you build and defend, it's something you explore and update. Neither approach is better. Both carry costs. The millennial risks never letting themselves rest, the Gen Z risks never feeling fully rooted. These aren't flaws, they're the logical outcomes of the world each generation was handed. What's really happening between these two generations isn't a rivalry, it's a mirror. Each one is showing the other something they can't quite see about themselves. Millennials carry a kind of quiet endurance that Gen Z sometimes mistakes for numbness. Gen Z carries a kind of emotional clarity that millennials sometimes mistake for naivety. But underneath all of it, the same question is running. How do I stay okay in a world that doesn't always make it easy? The answer just looks different depending on when you arrived. It was never about the memes. It was never about the music or the slang or who killed what industry. It was always about survival. About the specific shape your generation's wounds took, and the specific way you learned to carry them. Once you see that, the comparison stops feeling like competition. It starts feeling like recognition, and that awareness alone changes how you see both of them, including whichever one you are. If this explains something for you, there's more to uncover.